it's like to be an ace pilot? This is your chance to make that true.
I've got a mission for you.
Yes!
Blend in, find out who's loyal to the good guys and who isn't.
What was that?
What was what?
The throwing and the falling. Over there.
Don't think about it.
You can work on my team,
Get ready to be impressed.
but when it comes to your mission as a spy, I don't want anything to do with it.
Oh, you've got to be kidding me. I just wanted to wish my competition good luck.
This is fine. I'm fine.
Just be careful and don't explode.
I'll do my best.
This should be good.
Here we go. Star Wars Resistance in all new series.
Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you? I'm no one. There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
May the Force be with us.
My nerd world.
Just let it in.
Ojaba. Why does she get a blaster and I don't? Ojaba.
Okay, if somebody... I'm gonna give you the idea. Alright, someone's gonna give it to you. I'm not even gonna charge you. Alright? But here, somebody needs to do this. So, listening to the intro, and the line from The Force Awakens of Kylo Ren staring at his grandfather's mask, right? Nothing will stand in our way. I will finish what you started. Somebody needs to do a parody of that, but instead of Kylo, it's J.J. Abrams, and he's talking to Rian Johnson, right? I mean, nothing will stand in our way. I will finish what you started, right? From the I don't know, it just made me laugh. Welcome to episode number 136 of A Star Wars Podcast here on My Nerd World. I'm your host, Jon Justice. A couple of business items real quick to get out of the way. Thank you to everybody who has emailed me to join the My Nerd World mailing list to be the first ones to know about the, well, now it's kind of becoming a multimedia project. It will be out this holiday season, right? Coming soon this holiday season. My project that I've been working on, which I've been asking you to email me so I could put you on the list so you can be the first one or ones to know exactly what it is. And thank you to everybody who's emailed. We'll talk a little bit more about that later in the show. But talkshownerd@gmail.com. Also, I'm very excited to announce that we may have an official sponsor for the first time coming on board other than me and Mac Weldon. And hopefully next week I'll have some details on some amazing specials that you can take advantage of by going to macweldon.com. Go there now, but don't buy anything. Wait until I can give you the special promo code. But hopefully that will be on the show next week. Super excited about that. It's actually reached out to me, and I'm pleased to be able to get a sponsor on board, and more specifically, hopefully, to be able to offer you who take time to listen to the show every week and to email and reach out and support My Nerd World. Hopefully, I'll be able to give you a promo code with some amazing discounts that you can take advantage of. All right, so on the show this week, we will talk about the Resistance trailer that debuted for the new Disney cartoon coming up here in less than 2 months. We have the first talking point for Episode 9. It's become a thing now, right? Right? The Force Awakens, it was a return to doing things the old way, right? Real sets, practical effects. The Last Jedi, it was shocking, right? It's like, oh my gosh. It's right. This was gonna be shocking. Well, we have our first Episode 9 talking point, and I dig it. I'll tell you what it is. Watched Return of the Jedi this week, and I have a few observations. Last Jedi, Return of the Jedi comparisons. More specifically, what we can take away from Return of the Jedi in comparing to The Last Jedi, and what we will and won't get in Episode 9. Okay? So you follow the logic there? So based off of what we know about the movies and kind of what's been done already in the sequel trilogy, I think it's pretty easy to safely and rationally speculate on what we will and what we won't be seeing in Episode 9. Talk a little bit about why new Star Wars, okay? I'm not talking about timelines. I'm just talking about in terms of that which is being created now. How new Star Wars will never be like original trilogy Star Wars. And that's okay. That's okay. But new Star Wars can never be like the original trilogy, and it's actually a good thing. Plus, we have a ton, just a ton of listener feedback to get to this week. So let's not waste any time, and let's dive in and talk a little bit about this Star Wars Resistance trailer and this upcoming cartoon series.
There has been an awakening. Have you felt it?
A bit of breaking news on the cartoon. First off, if you haven't gone and watched the trailer yet and you're listening to the podcast, stop the podcast. That's the great thing about podcasts. You can pause them and go check out the trailer so that you'll know what the heck I'm talking about. We also know that according to some leak, and this was, I think it was an image that was posted on programming notes for TV that were giving off a few more details than what we got in the trailer. Apparently, it takes place like 6 months before The Force Awakens starts. And I've heard some chatter that the series may actually lead into The Force Awakens, and it might actually exceed sort of the timeline a little bit. Look, I am super excited about this show for one particular reason. And what has me most excited for this show, and I'm not going to lie, I'm actually more excited for this show than I am for the return of Clone Wars. For the very same reason. The reason I'm excited for this show is because I want more content post Return of the Jedi. That's, for me as a fan, and I don't care if that's, obviously after The Last Jedi, we're going to be getting Episode 9, and we want to see the continuation of that story. But I want content between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens. I want that timeline to be exposed, and I want stories in that timeline, because we don't know what happened between Episode 6 and Episode 7. We know that Jon Favreau's live-action TV show that'll be debuting next year takes place after Return of the Jedi, a handful of years, right? What did they say, 7 years after Return of the Jedi? Is that what it was? Something like that. So you've got a big gap in there to play with. But I want to see the beginnings of the First Order. I want to watch the seeds of the Resistance grow. I want to see the world get built leading into The Force Awakens. Now, granted, it hadn't changed all that much, but and I'm fine. I can't wait for Solo to be released. I'm really looking forward to it. I love the prequels. We've talked about it. But if you were to ask me, what timeline do you want Lucasfilm to create content in? It's that timeline. It's between 6 and 7, or anything that's around the Force Awakens timeline. I'm big on moving forward. And that's what has me excited about this show. Now, granted, this show is geared very young. You can tell by the clips that we've seen in the trailer. Okay, this is a Disney show skewed even younger than Rebels. I have no expectation of getting anything super meaty in terms of mythology or storyline, but I love the look of it. We've got essentially it's what was it? It was let me find out. Hold on, because I'm gonna mess it up, and then someone's gonna correct me, and I'm gonna feel dumb. All right, so I got it right. I was right. I was gonna guess, but we have essentially one new ship. We have a couple new ships. One of them in particular looks very, very similar to the R-41 Star Chaser, which is a part of some of the games that you can play. So I think especially X-Wing. And that ship in the trailer looks like to be a version of that, so that might be canonized. We know that the main character has himself a new ship, but I love seeing the aesthetic. I really do. And I'm excited that we're going to be getting some material, even if it is going to be, again, geared more towards kids. But I'll be able to watch it with my 11-year-old. I mean, then the whole family's going to end up watching it, right? It looks like it's falling somewhere in between Forces of Destiny and Rebels, leaning closer to, being a little bit less mature than perhaps Rebels. But I think the animation looks cool. It looks different. I'm glad we're getting something different. We'll be getting our Clone Wars back next year. And I liked the Rebels, the look of Rebels, even though it was different and they didn't have as big a budget as they had for the Clone Wars to do Rebels. But this looks really interesting to me. And I'm excited to see a story about pilots. So bottom line for me on Star Wars Resistance is I went in with low expectations, saw the trailer, and liked what I saw in terms of the visual, liked what I saw in terms of the story that we might be getting, and I'm way more excited about it than I thought that I was going to be. And it actually, again, gets me more excited for the live-action TV show and knowing that we're getting stories within this timeline between 6 and 7. I think it's the right move, and that's the timeline that I really want to see some stories pulled from.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
All right, so we've had 2 different circumstances now. This is twice this has happened. 2 different times where somebody either close to production or in production has made exactly the same comment about expectations for Episode 9. Again, this is the first talking point that we know. Look, they hand these out. This is the theme we're going to go with. In The Force Awakens, it was, practical effects, with real sets, practical effects. In The Last Jedi, it was, it's going to change everything that big surprises, twists and turns. So far, the first talking point that we have for Episode 9 is big surprises. So we had Carrie Fisher's brother. He said that in talking about how they would be using footage from The Force Awakens for Carrie Fisher in Episode 9. And now Domhnall Gleeson was doing a press conference. I don't know what movie he was doing it for, but he was asked about Episode 9 and made the same comment, big surprises. I think he might have even had an epic, no big, huge surprise there, but big surprises. So what can you do with big surprises? Well, you can't really do anything with big surprises, right? Big surprises is a relative term depending on the level of fandom and what it is you like about Star Wars. So, for example, big surprises could be there's a Resistance pilot flying a Naboo N1 starfighter. That would be a big surprise in my book. Big surprises could be, it turns out that Rey isn't a nobody. She's actually related to somebody. Big surprises could be that Luke Skywalker didn't actually die and The Last Jedi was one big, gigantic dream. That's a joke. I was making fun of those people that think that. No offense if that's you. The Last Jedi exists. It's a fantastic movie. It's a masterpiece. If you don't think so, then that's okay. I think it is absolutely fantastic, and my appreciation of that film grows and grows every single week, especially after watching Return of the Jedi this week, which I'll get into. But boy, my appreciation for The Last Jedi, shut up! Huge watching Return of the Jedi this week. So it'll be interesting to see if moving forward, as we hear from other members of the cast and crew, if they continue with the same theme of big surprises. I am genuinely curious and excited to see how Disney ends up marketing this film. Because I think, as I said last week, that this could be, if done correctly, they could really have some fun with the marketing aspect of this movie being the last one in the Skywalker saga, being Episode 9. No, I don't think they're going to split it up into 2 films. That just seems ridiculous to me. But you could really do some amazing things. And really, what's the word I'm looking for? You could really do fan service in the marketing, right? Not so much the movie, but in the marketing. You could do some really unique and special things, and I hope they start early. I want to get excited. I am excited for this movie, obviously, but I really want to savor every single moment because, as I've mentioned, this is the last time that we're going to be, essentially, for what we know, this is the last time we're going to be going through this. This is the last time we are going to be heading into the final story of this 9-arc saga that we've been living with for so long. And I really do hope Lucasfilm takes advantage of that and does something really special for it. So, in terms of big surprises, that could mean a lot of different things. So, let me take that and move over to the next topic this week, okay? And we'll kind of add in the big surprises part of it as part of my what to expect and what not to expect, based off of what we know. So, watched Return of the Jedi this week. I have no idea why, to be honest with you. I was working on the project that I keep talking about, and needed to kind of focus on it, but wanted to have something on in the background while I worked, and decided, you know what, I'll throw Return of the Jedi on. Of all the Star Wars movies, it's the one that I could put on, and I'm not going to be necessarily drawn into it and wanting to put everything down to watch it. I can just put it on in the background and just look up and watch the scenes that I like the most. Well, that didn't happen. I actually ended up sitting down and watching the whole thing, and I put my project away for a while. So if my project that's coming out over the holiday season comes out a day later, you can blame Return of the Jedi on Friday for that, because it took away probably at least a couple hours worth of work on it. So it was interesting watching Return of the Jedi, especially when looking at it through sort of a lens of The Last Jedi. And what I noticed was, much in the same way that J.J. Abrams pulled from the original trilogy in a number of different ways in The Force Awakens, which I have no problem with, Rian Johnson did stuff, as we all know, in The Last Jedi that kind of took away the ability to do that in Episode 9. So, for example, you're not going to do a throne room scene in Episode 9. If you were having it mirror Return of the Jedi, we've done that already. And in a really, really cool way. Watching Return of the Jedi and thinking about Snoke and the throne room scene and the Praetorian Guards and looking at the Imperial, the Red Guards, it was fun to watch Return of the Jedi and think for a moment that Snoke was behind the scenes somewhere or was aware of the setup that Palpatine had and how they are so similar with those Red Guards, and how in The Last Jedi we actually got to see the Praetorian Guards, essentially the Red Guards, like in full action in one of the best sequences of all of Star Wars, in my opinion. So in Episode 9, I don't think JJ is going to do that. One, you'd probably need, unless you're using Kylo Ren, you'd need another villain, which I think there's a possibility of, and I'll bring that up as part of my big surprises safe speculation, right? I don't think we'll see a super weapon. I could be wrong, but I seriously doubt that we're going to end up seeing a Starkiller Base 2, especially given the timeline. I mean, I think we can all agree we're going to jump ahead. By how many years we jump ahead, that remains to be seen. I'm guessing somewhere between 3 and 5, which, unless it was already being built, doesn't really give enough time for another large super weapon. Along those lines, as a side note, I love the idea of Snoke's supremacy. I love the idea that they still use the supremacy, but it's now sort of patched up. So, like, half of it's gone, or they're rebuilding it. See, that I think would be a really interesting nod and a way to have Episode 9 mirror Return of the Jedi, in that you could use the supremacy because it wasn't completely destroyed, right? And you could actually have it look very similar to the construction of the Death Star 2 in Return of the Jedi. Like, the supremacy is in the middle of being rebuilt. And I could even get on board with if the supremacy had some super weapon ability that they needed to knock it out. Or maybe it's just the fact that the First Order army, for the most part, is on board that ship still, and they need to take it out. Because I do believe, right, while I don't think we'll get a throne room scene, and I don't think we'll end up necessarily getting a full-on super weapon, I do believe we're going to get a massive space battle. I don't see how they don't do a massive space battle. I mean, like the biggest space battle that we've ever seen in a Star Wars movie. I think that is going to, if I were a betting man, I'd put all my money that the biggest action sequence of the entire film, large scale, is going to be the biggest space battle that we have ever seen. For a number of different reasons, but mostly because we haven't really gotten one. We have one in Rogue One, but that's the Rogue One battle scene, which is great. Don't get me wrong. The Rogue One end space battle scene reminds me a lot of the opening sequence of Revenge of the Sith. Sort of that upper atmosphere, stratosphere off the planet look. And that's not to say that you couldn't do that. I mean, we kind of had something similar with the attack on the Death Star, but I'm looking at something more along the lines of Return of the Jedi with large, with massive capital ships maybe around another thing they're trying to destroy. But I do firmly believe that we'll end up getting a massive space battle in Episode 9. I also think that we're going to get, at least one, if not several, lightsaber on lightsaber fights. Because the original trilogy, the sequel trilogy now has been rather light on those. We had the Finn versus the First Order officer, right? Trooper, the First Order trooper on Takodana in The Force Awakens. And then, of course, we had the end battle between Rey and Kylo Ren. But when you look at The Last Jedi, we had some saber-to-stick or stick-on-stick action between Rey and Luke. And then we had, Ben and Rey versus the Praetorian Guards, but we didn't really get any saber-on-saber action. And so I fully expect that we're going to see something on par with what we saw in the original trilogy. I kind of like the idea, too, that final confrontation, assuming that one happens between Kylo Ren and Rey, takes on a familiar feel of what we saw between Anakin and Obi-Wan in Revenge of the Sith. I like that idea, with these two going at it, but the reluctancy to, for one to kill another. So those are the things that, based off of what we've already seen on screen, I think we will see and what we won't see. And again, if you're J.J. Abrams, and I've said it before, that's why I'm saying it again, if you're J.J. Abrams, man, and I know the story's done, they're shooting it now, but it must have been, I can only assume, it must have been cool for J.J. Abrams and unique for him to be able to pick up writing Episode 9, which is really just an extension of The Force Awakens. Obviously the characters have grown, but when you look at the timeline, we went straight from The Force Awakens into The Last Jedi, and so we didn't skip a lot of time, and so our characters are kind of all in the same spot with a reduced resistance and having gone through some trauma and a very conflicted Ben Solo and Rey nobody. But now you're JJ, everything that you've established, you can just riff on that and tell your final story. That's got to be, I have to believe that was a cool position for him to be there. I just, that to me seems like a really good place to start off to craft a final story in a saga, right? And I guess we'll all find out now in less than a year.
Something inside me has always been there. But now it's awake. And I need help.
It's called nostalgia, Ray. And it's what so many of us fanboys cling to much, much too strongly. So, watching Return of the Jedi this week. And was enjoying it. Mentioned before, it's my least favorite of all the Star Wars movies, but I still do enjoy it. I was taken aback by kind of how simple it was. Like, that's the one thing about when you look at The Last Jedi and the First Order chasing the Resistance, and they're kind of staying in space. I know we go to Canto Bight, but we're just on Octu, and then we go to Crate at the end. And for whatever reason, on the first handful of viewings, that movie didn't feel very large in scope. It doesn't bother me at all, and I don't really feel that way anymore. Like I said, it was just kind of the first full viewings. I mean, that's one big difference between the prequels and the original trilogy, was the prequels were just so large in scope. But when you go back and look at Return of the Jedi, it wasn't either by any stretch. There was one particular shot in Return of the Jedi that I immediately thought of The Last Jedi, and it was a shot of the fleet, of the Rebel fleet, and it was taken at a low angle with Home One coming into frame and the other ships surrounding it. And it reminded me a lot of the shot that we see a couple times. Rian Johnson uses it a couple times, off to the right and in front of the Raddus as it passed by as they continue to get chased. And when I saw that in Return of the Jedi, I immediately thought of that scene from The Last Jedi. I'm like, wow, that is really, really reminiscent of that. And then it got me thinking too, oh wow, this has some similarities with The Last Jedi. Not just the throne room scene right at the end, but also the fact that you have the rebellion that's in space, kind of off on its own and getting ready to go and do this final battle. Of course, the circumstances are different in The Last Jedi, but I saw those parallels really interesting. The other thing that stuck out to me was this. And then we'll get to your listener feedback this week. There's a lot of stuff to go through. But the original trilogy is never going to be like any of the new movies or any other trilogy. And that's a good thing. I believe that one day they'll probably remake the original trilogy. It's probably going to be at a point when the fandom is old enough that guys like me aren't going to be as... Not that I would, mind you, but you know how the fandom is right now, where the element of the fandom that is so toxic and making money off of slamming these movies and Rian Johnson and Kathleen Kennedy, when those people have kind of burnt out, right? And there'll be others to take their place. But when the generation gets old enough that they're not going to care, I do think that one day they'll probably end up redoing the original trilogy, and I'm totally cool with that. That being said, a lot of people compare the movies. I do. The new movies to the original trilogy, that nostalgia factor. And the truth of the matter is you're never going to be able to go there again. When you look at nostalgia, for one, and how powerful nostalgia is, right? When you look at technology and the way that we consume information now and the way that we share information with one another and the way that we have discussions with one another about films and we dissect things, when you look at the marketing, when you look at the technology of the films themselves and how they were made, you're just never going to be able to duplicate that. Star Wars came along at exactly the right moment when Episode 4 was released, and it just caught the imagination of the world. And you shift the time when that movie is released, you change variables in society in the United States, and it was said by... I can't remember what reporter it was, but I'm repeating essentially what was said at the beginning of the Empire of Dreams documentary. You move any little thing and it doesn't hit. It doesn't have the impact. But you release it when it was released, and again, being a believer that everything happens for a reason, and it grabs on to society and our consciousness, and those films will. The original trilogy, episodes 4, 5, and 6, will forever be encapsulated in that little time frame. And they will always be compared to new movies, but the truth is the new movies will never compare to those films. They're made differently. They're not made by George Lucas. The technology is different now. The way that we discuss films and how that influences our opinion. I mean, whether you like it or not, I don't care how strong of an opinion you have and how strong-willed you are. It's near impossible at some point in time to not be affected and have your opinion affected in one way or another by what you read and what you see. Whether it reinforces your opinion, whether it changes your opinion, it's almost impossible to avoid that. That's why you see, and that's why I firmly believe The Last Jedi on a long enough timeline is going to be held up and incredibly well regarded, regardless of the controversy right now, because I think when people have enough time to kind of get away from other people's opinions, now granted, not everybody's will change. I know there are friends of mine who have just recently this week had messaged me on Twitter and said, yeah, you know what? I tried The Last Jedi again, and I just can't do it. That's fine. That's all good. But I think for a lot of people, looking back, they'll look back on The Last Jedi and end up enjoying it once they're able to distance themselves from all the negativity. And I think if people can begin to accept that fact, that the new movies are never going to be the original trilogy, they are just what they are, then, maybe that'll help people work through them. I don't know.
This is not going to go the way you think.
All right, as we get into listener feedback this week, I want to remind you can always leave a comment on YouTube. You can find the show on Spreaker, Stitcher, Podbean, YouTube, and iTunes. And you can email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com. Mentioned several times, many times, and I'll continue to remind you that if you have not emailed me yet to be added to the My Nerd World mailing list, that will be your opportunity to be the first ones to know all of the information of the multimedia project that I have been working on for quite a long time. That is due out just in time for the holiday season. Email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com, and I will add you to the list. Everybody who has emailed me, I'm pretty sure that I have responded. If I haven't, I apologize, but if you did email me to talkshownerd@gmail.com, rest assured, if I didn't email you back, thank you, but I have added you to the list. And it's really cool to see that so many of you are interested. If you're just hearing about it for the first time, if you're a fan of Star Wars, if you're a fan of My Nerd World or Jon Justice, then definitely go and drop me an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com. I got a project that I've been working on for a long time that's in its final phases, multimedia project. And again, I have a timeline worked out to hopefully have it out and available to the public, and you will know first this holiday season by signing up on the mailing list. Again, talkshownerd@gmail.com. All right, let's dive into it. Got a lot of comments this week to go over, and first, we will start with Victoria, and she writes this. So glad to see people saying they would like to see Rey and Ben settle on Naboo instead of Tatooine. Let me stop here real quick. It was only in retrospect, on last week's show, when I talked about the ending to Episode 9, and where would you rather see if Ben and Rey go off together, right, as a balanced couple with a galaxy saved? Would you rather see them end up on Tatooine or Naboo? It was only in retrospect that I realized that having them end up on Tatooine on the homestead was kind of ridiculous. Like, I could accept it from like the angle of if they needed to go and hide, so it makes sense that they would go hide at the place where Luke was essentially hidden. But the reality is, yeah, what a horrible thing for Rey. I mean, I know she'd have Ben, but that would kind of be a horrible existence to get off Jakku only to go to Tatooine. Yeah, Naboo makes a heck of a lot more sense. All right, and a lot of you guys responded with similar comments. Getting back to what Victoria said, I cringe when I hear that people want to send Rey back to a crappy, dead desert planet to live out her life. In my honest opinion, it would be like a punishment for her. She seems to love the water and the greenery and spent the last 15 years as a child on Jakku, barely surviving. I think they are going for a reverse Amidala here, so I'm not sure I agree that the wedding, if it even happens, would be very hush-hush and they would have to hide. That was part of the problem with Annie and Padme, and I think it will be fairly open. Not sure how they will work that. I foresee Rey becoming very strong in a different manner than she has had to be, and standing up to her adopted family at some point, but that would probably only work if Ben is more of a benevolent Ben-perer. But I could be completely wrong. Just some thoughts. I'm 1,000% for Ben-demption and gung-ho for Reylo, but only up to the point where it hurts Rey as it could if not handled correctly. For instance, more grief than that young woman as her spouse permanently dies, some grim exile scenarios like that. Look, and I'll repeat what I say. In JJ, I trust that they're going to end up doing the right thing. I do want to add something, and I forgot about it earlier in the show. So I'm going to you can take this comment and use your brain and do some mental gymnastics and place it to the big surprises little commentary that I did. Right. But one big surprise, and I was talking about this with a friend of mine, John. One surprise that, if worked correctly, could be kind of cool. I would be okay if Darth Plagueis made an appearance. Like, if they were able to justify that Plagueis has been in the background this whole time, that he was watching, that he was playing like the long game. Like, he was the one that in the novels that it wasn't necessarily Snoke that they were seeing out in the unknown regions. It was actually Darth Plagueis. And that when Palpatine bit the big one, Snoke was the one that was supposed to do Plagueis' bidding. And then now that Snoke has bit the big one, I would be personally fine, again, if they could work it out. If Plagueis decided in the final act, meaning the whole movie of Episode 9, in the final movie, if Plagueis makes an appearance, that he's been in the background the whole time, and I think there's actually some fun dynamics you can do with that. Like, Ben Perur, Kylo thought he was going to become the guy, and Plagueis shows up to finish what was started a long time ago and kind of relegates Kylo down, and maybe that's part of the thing that ends up turning him. Again, we just riffing off the big surprises, that would be a big, massive surprise, and a way to tie in the prequel trilogy, considering how important that scene was in Revenge of the Sith. Just a thought. Back to your listener comments. Friend of the show, Jennifer Oliver, writes this: "Oh yes, Rey was super mad when they got interrupted/busted." This would be in reference to last week and the hut scene in The Last Jedi. One could try to say she was mad about, did you do it? Did you create Kylo Ren? Did you try to murder him? But those were only words she used to justify her anger for what she was feeling. She was in the middle of one of the most important, amazing moments of her life, and Luke made it all go away. That's why she was so angry. She had heard Ben's version before the mirror cave scene. If she was that angry about it when Ben related it, she probably wouldn't have gone to find Luke right then, as nothing is more empowering than as righteous anger. But no, she weakly called Ben a liar while still believing him. After that conversation, her predominant emotion was inspiration. His advice inspired her to become who she is meant to be. I was as mad as she was at Uncle Luke's timing, LOL, so I can sympathize. Yeah, no, you know what? I dig it. I dig it. And watching it since then, Jennifer, because I read your comment, looking at it through those lenses, it creates a really interesting dynamic and scene in that very, very incredibly intimate scene. So thank you so much for the comments, and thanks to Victoria as well, and everybody who's written in this week. All right, let's move over to Alex. Alex Shepard writes this. Question: why does Ro free one Space Horse when they are likely to be captured again by the police? Why did Rose save Finn even though she didn't know there was an escape from the base? All right, so to the first question, I thought about that too when I watched The Last Jedi, but that's just kind of one of those moments where, you do whatever you need to do in your head. Like, it was funny because I think I've said it a couple times watching the movie, and that is, when she does that because she obviously wants to let the fathier go and join the other freed fathiers. But I remember saying out loud at one point, looking at Melinda, going, they can just go round up those fathiers again. But I think the point was we just assume it didn't happen and they got free, and Rose ended up setting that one free, and it was a nice moment. I mean, you can't look at Star Wars, and this isn't on you, Alex, so just my personal belief. You can't look at Star Wars through that detailed of a lens, or just you're going to find holes everywhere. All right, moving over to Anna's comment. Ben and Rey ending the trilogy together in Naboo. A dream come true, if only. But I will keep the faith. At least I hope to get to see them flying together in the Falcon. Yeah, I do too. All right, moving on to Maddie Solo, who, if I'm not mistaken, is the host of the wonderful Doing Talking, a Star Wars podcast, which you should add it to your list if you haven't done so already. All right, she writes this. I love what you said about the hand touch being even more romantic and intimate than Han and Leia's first kiss, because I feel the same way. In fact, I'll go a step further and say that Orion made it the most romantic moment in all of Star Wars, and it wasn't even a kiss. And I think it's worth mentioning, too, that if you watched Rian Johnson's other films, he's gone there. I mean, he's had some, we'll just say romantic scenes for the sake of the children that are listening. Whether it's in Looper or whether it's in Brothers Bloom, I mean, he's had adult themes in his films, so if that wasn't his intention, he did a masterful job. Like, he really wanted to have that intimacy, but needed to do it in a Star Wars way. Then I personally think he hit the nail on the head or touched the fingers gently and intimately together. Maddie goes on to say, he's a genius. I'm also a huge fan of the idea of Ben and Rey eloping at the end of the film, and maybe only a select few know about it and know where they go when they leave. As for their destination, I would much prefer Naboo to Tatooine. Rey spent too much time in her life on a desolate desert planet already, and she deserves to live in a paradise planet like Naboo. I think Naboo would also just be as effectively hit that nostalgia and familial connection as Tatooine did. It's where the prequels started, it's where Padme is from, and it's where Anakin and Padme fell in love. What better place for Ben and Rey to finally live out the happy ending his grandparents longed for? Yeah, and again, I mean, I'm not going to repeat everything I said before, but it was only in retrospect where I actually thought that was pretty silly to think, even for a moment, that that Rey and Ben, or just Rey, would end up on Tatooine. But let me. And Maddie hits upon a really good point, and I want to sort of expand upon that a bit, and that is that it really would be a nice way to wrap the whole thing up, start to finish. It's a better start to finish if you go to Naboo, considering we started on Naboo, right, in the Phantom Menace. So to return there at the end of this film of Episode 9, I think would be a really, really fantastic decision. All right, Amanda B. writes this. I've always known about Star Wars, and I remember watching one of the prequel movies when I was younger, but I really was not a fan. I did not go into seeing TFA with the thought of becoming a fan of Star Wars, but I did. After watching TFA, I wanted to know more, and slowly I watched the prequel and original trilogy movies. Now Star Wars has been added to my list of obsessions. As a new fan, I find it fun to find all these positive things and to collect stuff I would have passed by before. For me, it's hard to decide where I want them to end off. But if I could choose where Rey and Ben end up at the end of the movie, I would want it to be Naboo. Personally, I think it would be nice to have them be in the place where Anakin and Padme fell in love and got married. Tatooine would be a cool choice, but like you said, everyone's been there before, and why not have Ben and Rey there too? Honestly, I'm looking forward to seeing what will be done with 9, and I trust in what they have planned, although my anxiety would have to disagree, LOL. Thanks for another great podcast. Amanda, thank you for another fantastic email. All right, SJs writes this. Thank you for reading my comment last week. I also left a comment about the ending for Episode 9. What do you think of the idea of Rey and Ben having a child who's not obviously Force sensitive, and they leave it ambiguous? What a gift and ending it would be for the Skywalker line for all their sacrifice to result in a child who doesn't have the weight on his shoulders like every Skywalker before him, but leave it slightly ambiguous. Yeah, I can see him doing it. I know that it's one of those things that's been rumored. There were some rumors going around, some leaks from people who said they seemed to know things, that there would be a child involved or they were casting a child. It wouldn't be at the top of my list of things that I would want to see them do for Episode 9, but I'm also not opposed to it as long as it's handled correctly. And as I keep saying, I firmly believe that they will handle and make all these decisions correctly. All right, Stacey L. Writes this. It's interesting that you think they'll possibly manipulate the Maz and Leia scene into one between Leia and Rey, because I was thinking the exact same thing, except they do it with Leia and Ben. Interesting. We were talking about, using the footage that wasn't used in The Force Awakens for Episode 9, and one of the scenes we know exists because it was in one of the trailers was Maz Kanata handing over the Legacy Saber to Leia. And what if you took that footage and manipulated it to where the Legacy Saber looked different, or it was a different lightsaber, or it looked different because it had been rebuilt by Rey, and instead of having Maz hand it over, it's Rey, and Tracy is suggesting maybe it's Ben. As it be the same gesture that he almost completed with Han in The Force Awakens, giving him his lightsaber until darkness took over. Anyway, thanks for a great podcast. Thank you, Tracy, and that's a fantastic idea. All right, let's go to Misconduct 1. Writes this. In regards to the fandom, I just want to say something. Having been a huge Star Wars fan since the early 80s, when I was a child, I've seen a pattern with these movies. George said that every generation needs their story told. When I was a child, I remember my brother and his friends talking about how crazy critics were when they say The Empire Strikes Back sucked. But it was the best Star Wars movie so far. Then years into the future, the critics and even I myself didn't receive the prequels very well. I just want to say that my view of the prequels has changed in the last 3 years. But if you ask all three of my teenagers and their friends, the prequels were the best movies. Now I have all these preschool children who wear Kylo Ren t-shirts and have all these sequel trilogy action figures. They like to bring to school. They play Star Wars rescue missions outside on the playground. The children love it. It's true, a lot of adults love it as well, and while some also hate it right now, the critics who really count, the ones who the movies are really made for, don't ever have a voice until they get older. And as my children and others of the prequel generation have done for me, they pull the haters in and help them see the story through their own eyes. The fandom is going to come together again, as it always has in the past, but it's going to take about 10 to 15 years while we wait for this generation's voice to be heard. The voice of the only critics and fans who count the children, the one who these films are really made for. Does that make sense? Yeah, that makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. And some really great comments. Thank you very much for that. All right, on to Vesuvi. Says this. Thanks, John. Since you asked if given the choice between the two ending spots you mentioned, I think I prefer to see 9 wrapping up at the Naberi Lake House on Naboo. Yeah, I really am regretting suggesting that. Now, no, I appreciate the fact that everybody wrote in, but like I said, in retrospect, it was kind of ridiculous to think that they would put Rey for the rest of her life on another desert planet. Something's telling me that Rey would not want to go back to living on a desert world, even if it was in hiding. And there would be poetry to that notion, right? Given the stark and barren place to a lush and living locale. That moment from Episode 7 where she, on the Millennium Falcon over Takodana, observed, I didn't know there was so much green in the galaxy. It's one of my favorite moments in all of Star Wars. If the Skywalker saga is to end on a hopeful note, it will. I'd like to see it conclude with an equally beautiful world. Ultimately, I'm fine with whatever the storytellers give us, because the epic tale sung through many voices over many movies, TV shows, and novels is their story. The headcanon is mine. But I've loved everything they've shown me so far. All different degrees, of course, and I think I'm likely to end up loving whatever they serve up. Onto Vesuvi, I tend to agree as well. All right, got a couple more here. Betty Aaliyah writes this. Always look forward to your podcast. Thank you, Betty. As you know, there were people after The Force Awakens who thought Rey and Kylo, JJ had said before Force was released, everybody likes a fairy tale and a prince and princess. In the last couple of weeks, I've seen a lady in her 30s wearing a Kylo t-shirt, another lady with a Star Wars t-shirt saying she and her husband were Star Wars nerds, and a boy around 15 with a Star Wars t-shirt. Thank you for your enthusiasm for the things you love. Thank you very much, Betty. I appreciate that. All right, Bonnie Fisher writes this. Thanks for the recent shows. Always a nice Star Wars treat to my busy week. Thank you, Bonnie. Number one, I do hope the end of the Skywalker saga means the beginning of the Solo saga, but that's just my opinion. I do hope that is not the full main cast, and there are several surprises not revealed, like Yoda or even Phasma. Anakin, please. I want an alive, redeemed Ben Solo. No prison. Exile with Rey is okay. Fine with him having some ruling power, too. I've been reading too many fanfics where Kylo does a good job as supreme leader, gets rid of slavery rules, fairy starts a democracy, an armistice with the resistance. Wow, fit that into a 2-hour movie. Love the Naboo ending, exile, wedding, whatever, over Tatooine. Same reasons that we've mentioned before. If there is a wedding, please have human witnesses. Would love for R2-D2 and C-3PO to be there like Anakin and Padme. But for the love of Force, this wedding should not be a secret. There's no way for the scene to have Carrie Fisher, have Finn and Rose witness it. If there is no way for the scene to have Carrie Fisher, have Finn and Rose witness it. Still love Ben and Rey flying off in the Falcon with a kid. I think TFA and The Last Jedi both end with the Falcon speeding off in space. Disney comments. I have to believe that Disney wants to keep Star Wars popular. They are pushing lots of exclusive content for their streaming channel, including trying to get the broadcast rights back from TBS for the original Star Wars films. They have the Star Wars Galaxy's Edge opening hopefully before 9 at Disneyland 2020 at Walt Disney World. I do not believe they will end the Skywalkers with 9. I do think there is a twist to their announcement about the end of the Skywalker saga, just so we stay tuned. Last week, Bonnie writes, I came across a newer YouTube channel called Girl with Sabers. A channel was encouraged by the Den of Nerds Josh Lucas. They mentioned your podcast about all the old ships appearing in 9 in their episode about 9's cast announcement. Oh, wow, they did? They also list your podcast as a positive podcast regarding the Star Wars in the notes for their shows. What? How am I just now finding out about this? I gotta go check that out. This is what happens when I don't proofread the... I don't ever do that. I mentioned it before, but I do it the same way I do the show. Sometimes I do, but oftentimes I like to be surprised. Like right now, I had no idea that this was written on August, so this just a few days ago. August 14th, Bonnie wrote me. I'm just now reading it and finding out that there's another podcast out there called Girls with Sabers that's talking about me. That just totally... Well, all your notes made my day, but now I'm going to have to go check that out when I'm done with the show. That's cool. I'm blushing. If it wasn't a podcast, you could see my face. It's very red. All right. Thank you for that, Bonnie. Jody writes this. Ben is royalty. Saying Naboo. Ben is royalty, or at least nobility on so many levels, right? Through Leia and the way his character is coded. In a successful marriage relationship, the couple raises each other up on all levels. This is a fairy tale in space. Ben should raise Rey up to nobility, and their happily ever after should be in a castle on beautiful Naboo, writes Jody. Yeah, I think we've cleared that one up, haven't we? All right. Last comes friend of the show, Tony. Just huge shout out to Tony. Tony is amazing. Tony has been, I think, listening to me in one way, shape, or form for a long, long time, and makes my day because he retweets a lot of my stuff and comments, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate Tony. So Tony wrote, please add me to your special project list so I can get all the updates. Can't wait to find out the specifics of what you've been working on all this time. Yeah, man, it has been a long time. Hopefully I can shorten the process for the next time around, because this is taking a long time, but I'm learning a lot. Love your passion for all things Star Wars and enjoy listening to the podcast every week. Listen to your daily show on TCNT via iTunes with Drew and Sam. Makes my workday go more quickly as I stay informed. Thanks so much for all you do. He makes some comments in here. I won't go into them because they're not Star Wars related. Talking about Guardians of the Galaxy. But he wraps up on this. Hope all this makes sense. I had a Zima with a shot of vodka mixed in. I'm a big Zima fan. I don't know if I've mentioned that or not. But like I said, there may be a new sponsorship of Mack Weldon, MackWeldon.com, starting on the show hopefully next week. But Zima, if you're listening, I'll pimp your products too, because I love me some Zima, especially with some grenadine. Actually, if you throw just like a little hint of vanilla extract into a Zima, it is just perfection. It's amazing. Thank you so much for checking out the show this week. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did recording it. Again, talkshownerd@gmail.com. As soon as I wrap this up and get it posted, I'm going back to working on the project that I keep talking about. And it's a slog, man. I can't wait. I'm so excited. And I know I've been secretive, and I will explain it all once I'm at a point where I can start spilling the details. But I'm super excited, and I can't wait to share it with you. It's been a labor of love now, from idea to now probably about 3 years. In terms of actual work, it's been about 2 solid years worth of work. And we've got a couple of months still to go, but I'm super excited about it. Again, if you haven't joined the email list, talkshownerd@gmail.com, just say, hey, add me to the list, and you will be the first ones to know about the project coming up this holiday season. So again, have yourself a fantastic week. Thank you so much for checking out the show, and I'll talk to you again from a galaxy far, far away in about 7 days.
The Force will be with you, always.
My Nerd World.